The portal between worlds tore reality apart like paper. Lyra held tight to Nyx as they fell through the screaming void between dimensions. Colors that had no names flashed around them, while sounds that could drive mortals mad echoed from the darkness. The dragon's powerful wings beat against winds that blew from dead stars. When they finally crashed through the other side, both queen and dragon tumbled across hard concrete that scraped against ancient scales. Lyra rolled away from Nyx and tried to stand, but her legs shook from the dimensional travel. Her silver hair was tangled with debris and her royal robes were torn. Alarms began to wail from buildings that looked nothing like elven architecture. Everything was made of metal and glass with sharp corners that hurt to look at. Strange vehicles with flashing lights surrounded them, while men and women in identical clothing pointed weapons that hummed with unfamiliar energy. Nyx struggled to her feet, but one wing hung. At an awkward angle, the portal crossing had reopened old wounds and fresh blood ran down her midnight scales. The great dragon's breathing was labored, and her golden eyes showed pain. She tried to hide from her bonded queen. "Do not move," shouted a woman with short brown hair and insignia that marked her as some kind of leader. She held her weapon steady, but her voice carried authority rather than fear. "This is a restricted military zone. You will identify yourselves immediately." Lyra raised her hands to show she meant no harm but kept her body between the humans and her injured companion. "My name is Lirelai of the Sylvan Courts," she said in the human tongue which she had learned from ancient texts. "This is Nyx, my bonded dragon we seek, sanctuary from enemies that threaten both our worlds." The woman who had spoken stepped forward while keeping her weapon ready. She had intelligent brown eyes and moved with the confidence of someone used to making difficult decisions. "I am Colonel Maya Rodriguez of the United States Air Force," she said. "You claim to be from another world, but that is impossible." Before Lyra could explain, a commotion arose from the crowd of soldiers. A man pushed through the ranks to help with crowd control. He was tall with dark hair and kind eyes that seemed familiar in a way that made her heart stop beating. The moment she saw his face, the world around her disappeared. Everything else became distant and unreal, as if she was looking at it through deep water. His features were exactly like Theron's, from the strong jaw to the gentle curve of his mouth. Even the way he stood with his weight shifted slightly to the left was identical to her lost husband. Time seemed frozen as she stared at this impossible man. He noticed her attention, and their eyes met across the space between them. She saw confusion in his gaze, but also recognition, as if some deep part of him remembered her face from dreams. He could not quite recall. Daniel Clark stepped forward without thinking. His fellow guards called out warnings, but he ignored them. Something about the strange woman with silver hair and pointed ears made him feel like he was coming home after a long journey. He had never seen her before, but somehow he knew her face. Colonel Rodriguez noticed the interaction between them and her frown deepened. She signaled for her medical team to approach the injured dragon while keeping her attention on the two figures who seemed lost in each other. Dr. Lisa Bennett arrived with her xenobiology equipment. Her specialty was studying alien life forms, though until today she had never expected to use her training on actual aliens. She approached Nyx slowly with her hands visible and her voice calm. "Your companion is badly injured," she said to Lyra. "I can see that some of these wounds are old, but they have been torn open again. The bleeding needs to stop or she will not survive." Lyra finally tore her attention away from Daniel and knelt beside her dragon's great head. Nyx's breathing was becoming more shallow and the golden light in her eyes was growing dim. The queen placed her hands on the dragon's neck and began to sing an ancient healing song. The melody was unlike anything the humans had ever heard. It seemed to come from the earth itself and carried power that made the air shimmer like heat waves. Some of the soldiers stepped back in wonder, while others readied their weapons in fear. But as Lyra sang, Daniel found himself walking forward despite the shouts of his supervisors. Something deep inside him responded to the music as if his very bones remembered songs like this from another life. His feet carried him to the dragon's side without any conscious decision, and he knelt beside Nyx and placed his hand on her scales. The healing song grew stronger. The dragon's wounds began to close faster, and her breathing became steady again. Dr. Bennett watched in amazement as her instruments registered impossible readings. "How is this possible?" she whispered while taking notes as fast as she could. "Humans are not supposed to have any psychic or magical abilities, yet somehow he is amplifying her healing process." General Patricia Vance arrived in a convoy of black vehicles. Her stern face showed no surprise at finding aliens in her base, but her eyes were sharp with intelligence and caution. She had been preparing for first contact scenarios for years, though she had never imagined it would happen like this. She called for an immediate meeting in the secure briefing room, while medical teams worked to stabilize Nyx under Lyralay's guidance. The dragon was too large to move, but they set up a protective perimeter around her. Daniel remained at her side as if drawn by invisible threads. In the briefing room, Lyralay found herself surrounded by military officials who asked endless questions about her world and her purpose on Earth. She answered as honestly as she could while part of her mind remained focused on the impossible man who looked like her dead husband. "The Syndicate has consumed 17 worlds," she explained while pointing to star charts that meant nothing to human astronomers. "They drain the life force from entire planets to feed something even worse. Their mechanical armies are supported by beings they call their human allies, General." Vance leaned forward with interest. "We have been tracking unusual energy signatures around the globe for the past week. Our satellites have detected objects that do not match any known technology. Are you saying these are hostile alien forces? They are coming here," Lyralay said with certainty that chilled everyone in the room. "The Syndicate believes humanity will make powerful servants because you adapt to new situations faster than any other species they have encountered. They want to harvest your world but keep your people alive to serve their purpose." The general exchanged glances with her staff. This matched intelligence reports they had received about strange activities in remote locations around Earth. But the idea that aliens were planning an invasion seemed like science fiction until today. Colonel Rodriguez spoke up. "What about the man outside Daniel Clark? He seems to have some kind of connection to you and your dragon. How is that possible?" Lyralay felt her heart clench as she struggled to find words that would make sense. 50 years ago, my husband was taken from our world by enemies who wanted to study elven magic. I believed he was dead until recently when I learned he had been transported somewhere across the dimensions." She paused to gather her courage before continuing. "Daniel looks exactly like Theron, down to the smallest detail. It is either the most impossible coincidence in the universe or somehow my husband's essence has found a way to manifest in your world." Dr. Bennett had joined the meeting after ensuring Nyx was stable. Her scientific mind raced with possibilities. "I have been scanning Daniel's genetic structure," she reported. "The results are extraordinary. His DNA shows signs of dimensional tampering, as if his very cells have been rewritten by exposure to interdimensional energy." Before anyone could respond, alarms began blaring. Throughout the base, emergency broadcasts filled the screens showing news reports from around the world. Strange mechanical objects were appearing in major cities, while reports came in of advanced technology turning human weapons against their operators. General Vance stood immediately and began issuing orders to her staff. The invasion had begun sooner than expected, and Earth's defenses were being tested by an enemy they did not understand. Through the windows, they could see Daniel still, sitting beside Nyx while the great dragon seemed to be healing faster than should be possible. The connection between them defied all scientific explanation, but could not be denied. Lyralay looked at the chaos erupting around her and made a decision that would change the fate of both worlds. If Earth was going to survive this war, they would need help from someone who understood the enemy. And if Daniel truly carried some part of Theron's essence, then perhaps love could indeed transcend the barriers between dimensions. The first explosions lit up the night sky as Syndicate forces began their assault on humanity. But in a military base where an elven queen sat beside her dragon, while a human guard discovered powers he never knew and possessed, the real war was just beginning. Queen Lyralay stood on the highest tower of her crystal palace and watched her world die around her. The sky above Ethermore burned with unnatural fires while cracks of pure darkness spread across the heavens like spider webs. Her long silver Hair moved in winds that carried the scent of dying magic and lost dreams. Below her, the last of the elven cities glowed with fading light. The great trees that had stood for 10,000 years were turning to ash, and their ancient songs were becoming whispers. The rivers that once flowed with liquid starlight now ran black with poison from the mechanical invaders. Nyx landed beside her with a sound like thunder. The great shadow dragon folded her wings and lowered her massive head. The dragon had been Lyrale's companion for 3 centuries, and her scales bore the scars of countless battles. Her golden eyes reflected the same sadness that filled the queen's heart. The mechanical beings had come from beyond the void 3 years ago. They called themselves the Syndicate, and they consumed worlds like hungry beasts. Their ships were made of twisted metal and dark energy. They turned living planets into dead rocks and stole all the magic from the air. 17 realms had already fallen. To their hunger, Lyrale had received the final messages from each world as they died. The screams of entire civilizations being drained of life still echoed in her dreams. She was the last free ruler in this part of the universe, and her people were counting on her to save them. A messenger ran up the spiral stairs to the tower. He was young and his face was pale with fear. "Your Majesty," he said while trying to catch his breath. "Lord Kalen sends word from the southern borders the enemy has broken through our defenses. They will reach the civilian camps by dawn." Lyrale felt ice form in her chest. Lord Kalen was her most trusted advisor and the commander of her armies. He had served her family for 50 years and never failed in his duty. But something in the messenger's voice made her feel uneasy. "Tell me exactly what he said," she commanded. The young elf swallowed hard and spoke again. "He said, the human allies of the Syndicate are leading the attack. He said they fight without honor and use weapons that turn our own magic against us. He said we must evacuate everyone to the northern sanctuary immediately." The mention of humans made Lyrale's heart skip. Humans were supposed to be a young race from a distant realm called Earth. She had heard stories that they were primitive and had no magic at all. How could they be helping the Syndicate destroy worlds with power beyond imagination? Nyx raised her great head and spoke directly into Lyrale's mind through their ancient bond. "Something is wrong about this." The dragon's mental voice was like warm honey mixed with steel. "I smell deception in the air. The scent of lies and betrayal." Lyrale placed her hand on the dragon's neck and felt the familiar comfort of their connection. She had learned long ago to trust Nyx's instincts. The dragon could sense things that even elven magic could not detect. "Send word to all the camps," she told the messenger. "Tell them to begin evacuation, but not to the northern sanctuary. Tell them to gather at the Crystal Falls. We will make our stand there." The young elf nodded and ran back down the stairs. As night fell, Lyrale and Nyx flew over the evacuating camps. The sight broke her heart. Families carried what few possessions they could. Save children who had never known fear now clung to their parents with wide, frightened eyes. The elderly moved slowly on paths lit by dying magic. The Crystal Falls had been a place of celebration for her people for thousands of years. Now it would become a battlefield. She landed near the ancient stones where her ancestors had once danced under 3 moons. Now only 1 moon remained in the sky, and it was cracked down the middle. Lord Kalen arrived with the rear guard just before dawn. His armor was dented and his sword was stained with the oil that flowed in Syndicate machines. Instead of the relief she expected to feel, Lyrale noticed something cold in his gray eyes. "My queen," he said with a bow that seemed less respectful than usual, "I have grave news to report. The enemy forces are stronger than we thought. They have technology we cannot understand and allies we never expected." "What allies?" she asked, though she already feared the answer. "Humans," he replied, and his voice carried a strange tone of satisfaction. "They have made a pact with the Syndicate. They fight alongside the machines with weapons that drain magic from the very air. They are more dangerous than any enemy we have ever faced." Lyrale felt the world spin around. Her humans were supposed to be weak and primitive. How could they have such power? And why would they ally with creatures that destroyed entire worlds for food? But there is something else. Kalen continued. His eyes gleamed with something that looked almost like cruel joy. Something you should know about your precious husband. The mention of Theron made Liralai's blood freeze. Her husband had died 50 years ago in the first battles against Dimension Raiders. His body had never been found, but she had felt his life force leave the world. She had mourned him for decades. Theron did not die as you believed, Kalen said with a smile that made her skin crawl. He was taken. He was transported to the human realm where he lives. Still, the Syndicate wanted to study elven magic, and he was their perfect test subject. The words hit Liralai like physical blows. She staggered backward, and Nyx moved to support her with one great wing. The dragon's eyes blazed with fury, and her claws dug furrows in. The ancient stone you lie, she whispered, but even as she said it, she felt a terrible certainty that he spoke truth. I do not lie. Kalen pulled a small crystal from his armor and threw it at her feet. Inside the crystal was an image that moved like captured memory. It showed Theron older and changed, standing in what looked like a human military compound. He was alive, but his eyes were empty, as if his soul had been torn away. The Syndicate offered me a choice. Kalen continued, his voice growing. Louder with each word. I could watch our people die slowly as we lost battle after battle, or I could help them end this war quickly by giving them what they wanted. Information about our weaknesses, knowledge of our magic, and most importantly, the location of our queen. Before Liralai could react, Kalen raised his hand and spoke words in a language that hurt to hear. A tear in reality opened behind him, and through it, she could see the mechanical armies of the Syndicate waiting like hungry. Wolves, you will join your husband soon, he said as he stepped toward the portal. But first you will watch your people burn. Nyx roared with rage that shook the mountains. The dragon's flame turned the night to day as she lunged toward the traitor. But Kalen was already through the portal, and it snapped shut behind him, leaving only the scent of burning metal and broken dreams. Liralai stood alone with her dragon companion, while around them the last free elven city prepared for a war they could not win. But in her heart, a new fire was burning. If Theron was alive somewhere in the human realm, then she would find him. She would cross the void between worlds and bring him home, even if it meant following her enemies into the unknown. The sound of approaching engines filled the air, and the first Syndicate ships appeared on the horizon. Their weapons began to glow with deadly light as they prepared to finish what they had started. Nyx looked at her queen with eyes full of ancient wisdom and fierce love. Where you go, I follow, she said in the bond they shared. Even to the end of all things. Liralai climbed onto the dragon's back and felt the familiar strength of their partnership fill her with determination. The war for Ethermore was lost, but the war for love and justice was just beginning. Together they rose into the burning sky and flew toward a destiny that would take them far from everything they had ever known. Daniel Clark woke from dreams that felt more real than his waking life. In sleep, he walked through crystal cities under alien stars and spoke with beings made of living light. His hands remembered the weight of weapons that had never existed on Earth, and his heart ached for a love he had never known. The dreams had started the night after meeting the Elven Queen and her dragon. Each night they grew stronger and more detailed. He saw himself standing in great halls, carved from single gemstones, while creatures with pointed ears and ageless faces bowed to him, as if he were nobility. Dr. Bennett called him to her laboratory every morning to run more tests. Her instruments showed changes in his cellular structure that defied everything science knew about human biology. His DNA was rewriting itself in patterns that matched samples taken from Liralai's blood. You are becoming something new, she told him while studying readouts that made no sense. The dimensional energy exposure is not just changing your genetics, it is awakening memories that should not exist in your mind. Daniel sat on the examination table and tried to explain what he was experiencing. Every time I touch something that belongs to her world, it responds as if it knows. Yesterday I held one of her jewelry pieces and it began to glow. When I gave it back, she looked at me like I was a ghost. The changes were not just mental. His reflexes had become faster and his senses sharper. He could hear conversations from across the base and see details in the darkness that others missed. Most disturbing of all, he was beginning to understand the Elven language without ever studying it. Meanwhile, Nyx had recovered enough to share her memories with those she trusted. The great dragon connected her mind to both Lyralee and Daniel, showing them visions of events from 50 years ago. The images were clearer than any recording and filled with emotions that struck like physical blows. In the shared vision they saw Theron discovering papers hidden in Lord Kaelin's private chambers. The documents revealed detailed plans to betray the Elven kingdoms to interdimensional raiders. Theron had been gathering evidence when Kaelin discovered him. The confrontation between the two elves played out like a nightmare. Kaelin did not kill Theron because that would have created a martyr. Instead, he used experimental technology stolen from early Syndicate contacts to scatter Theron's consciousness across multiple dimensions. Your essence was torn apart and cast into the void. Nyx explained to Daniel through the mental link. But consciousness is harder to destroy than physical matter. Small pieces of who you were managed to anchor themselves in receptive minds across different worlds. Daniel felt sick as the implications became clear. So I am not really human. I am some kind of ghost possessing an innocent person's body. Lyralee took his hand and the contact sent warmth through both of them. You are both and neither, she said. Softly, Theron's memories and personality have blended with Daniel Clark's original self. You are a new person, created from the best parts of two souls. The revelation was interrupted by Commander Rachel Stone arriving with urgent intelligence reports. Her face was grim as she spread photographs across the table, showing Syndicate activities around the globe. The enemy is not just attacking with brute force, she explained. They have been studying human psychology and social structures for months. Their strategy is designed to turn our own strengths against us. The photographs showed human collaborators working alongside mechanical beings. These were not prisoners or enslaved people, but volunteers who seemed eager to help the invaders. Commander, Stone's voice was filled with disgust as she continued. Some humans are actually helping them willingly. They have been promised power and technology in exchange for betraying their own species. The Syndicate has learned to exploit human greed and ambition. General Vance joined the briefing with even worse news. Our conventional weapons are being turned against us faster than we can deploy them. Every tank, every fighter jet, every missile system becomes their property the moment they target it with their conversion technology. But there was hope mixed with the despair human forces had discovered that older technology and simpler weapons were resistant to Syndicate interference. Swords and bows worked when laser rifles failed. Horses could charge when tanks betrayed their drivers. More importantly, human soldiers were adapting to impossible situations with creativity that amazed their alien enemies. When weapons failed, they used tools. When tools failed, they used their bare hands. When outnumbered, they used terrain and weather to their advantage. Dr. Bennett had been studying combat footage from around the world. Her analysis revealed patterns that excited her scientific mind. Humans exposed to Syndicate technology for extended periods were developing minor psychic abilities. Some could sense when their equipment was about to malfunction. Others could resist mental influence techniques. This matches what we are seeing with Daniel. She reported his exposure to Elven magic is accelerating the same process. The human mind is more adaptable than anyone realized. When pushed to extremes, it can evolve in real time. The conversation was interrupted by alarms as another wave of attacks began worldwide. But this time, human forces were ready with tactics learned from previous encounters. Mixed units of regular soldiers and volunteers trained by Lyralee fought with combinations of human technology and Elven magic. Sergeant Nicole Hayes led a special operations team that had learned to channel power through modified weapons. Her rifle now fired bursts of energy that could pierce Syndicate armor, while her combat knife had been blessed by Elven priests to cut through mechanical flesh. Captain Amanda Foster piloted, an experimental fighter enhanced with scales gifted by Nyx. The Dragon's natural resistance to energy weapons made her aircraft nearly invulnerable to Syndicate fire, while improved sensors allowed her to track enemies through dimensional interference. The tide of battle was slowly turning as humans proved they could adapt to any challenge, but the cost was enormous. Entire cities lay in ruins, while millions of people had been evacuated to underground shelters. The world as humanity knew it was ending, even as they fought to save it. In quiet moments between battles, Lyrelei and Daniel grew closer as memories continued to surface. The love between her and Theron had transcended death itself, and was finding new expression in this strange blending of souls from different worlds. But their growing connection was noticed by enemy agents who had infiltrated human military communications. Lord Kalen appeared in broadcasts transmitted through hijacked television networks. His appearance had changed, dramatically, with mechanical parts replacing much of his original elven body. "My dear queen," he said with a voice like grinding metal, "I see you have found what remains of your beloved husband. How touching that love can survive even the complete destruction of identity." The image of Kalen smiled with cruel satisfaction. But Theron is just scattered fragments now mixed with primitive human consciousness. He will never be the man you once loved. Even if you somehow restore his memories, he will always be changed by what he has become. Lyrelei felt rage burn in her chest, but Daniel placed his hand on her shoulder, and the anger transformed into determination. They had both lost so much to this war, but they had also found something new in each other. A love that had survived impossible odds and been made stronger by adversity. The broadcast continued with Kalen revealing the true scope of the Syndicate's plan. They were not just conquering Earth, but using it as a staging ground for assaults on dozens of other worlds. Humanity's natural adaptability made them perfect soldiers for an interdimensional empire. But there was something else hidden in Kalen's words, a hint of desperation that suggested the war was not going as well for the Syndicate as they had hoped. Human resistance was stronger than predicted, and their own forces were taking heavy casualties. As night fell over the battlefield, Lyrelei stood with Daniel and Nyx looking at the stars that no longer seemed foreign to any of them. The war was far from over, but for the first time since the invasion began, they had reason to hope. Tomorrow would bring new battles and fresh challenges, but tonight they had each other, and in a universe filled with darkness and mechanical horror that was enough to keep the light of hope burning bright. The dragon settled her great bulk around them like a living fortress, while her telepathic voice whispered comfort to minds strained by impossible revelations. "Whatever comes next, we face it together," she said. Nothing can break bonds forged by love and tempered by war. The war had been raging for 3 months when the first group of human volunteers completed their training in elven combat magic. Sergeant Nicole Hayes stood at the head of her special operations team as Lyrelei taught them to blend technology with ancient power. Their weapons now hummed with energy that could pierce any Syndicate armor. The training ground was a converted aircraft hangar where human soldiers practiced alongside elven refugees who had escaped through dimensional rifts. The sight would have been impossible to imagine before the invasion, but now it represented humanity's best hope for survival. Captain Amanda Foster climbed into her modified fighter, while ground crews finished installing dragon-scale armor gifted by Nyx. The scales had been freely given when the dragon molted, and they provided better protection than any human technology. Her aircraft looked like a hybrid between machine and living creature. "We launch in 10 minutes, Foster announced over the radio. Intelligence reports show a major Syndicate force moving toward the Chicago evacuation zones. If we can hit them before they reach the civilian shelters, we might save 1 million lives." Daniel stood beside Lyrelei on the observation deck watching. The preparations below his transformation was nearly complete, and he now carried memories from both his human life and Theron's elven existence. The blending had created someone new who was stronger than either original person. The dreams had stopped, because they were no longer dreams but recovered memories. He remembered his first meeting with Lyrelei in the crystal gardens of her palace and their wedding ceremony under 3 moons. He also remembered Daniel Clark's childhood on Earth and his years as a security guard. Dr. Bennett approached them with her latest research findings. Her excitement was obvious despite the grim circumstances surrounding her work. "Human adaptation rates are exceeding all our models," she reported. "People exposed to interdimensional energy are developing abilities we never thought possible." She showed them video footage from battlefields around the world. Human soldiers were demonstrating minor telekinesis, moving objects with their thoughts alone. Others, could sense enemy positions through solid barriers or predict when their equipment would malfunction. This is beyond natural evolution. Bennett continued. It is as if humanity was designed to interact with forces from other dimensions. Your people have been preparing Earth for this war whether they knew it or not. The briefing was interrupted by urgent communications from the front lines. Commander Rachel Stone's voice crackled through static as she reported from the ruins of what had been Detroit. The Syndicate has changed tactics. She said they are no longer trying to convert our technology. Instead, they are using some kind of psychological warfare that turns people into willing collaborators. The reports were disturbing. Entire military units were surrendering without a fight after exposure to new Syndicate broadcast signals. Civilians were walking willingly into enemy ships while smiling as if they had been offered wonderful gifts. But human forces had discovered that people with psychic abilities were immune to the mental influence. This meant that soldiers trained by elven instructors could operate in areas where normal humans would be compromised. The war was becoming a contest between evolution and technology general. Vance called for an emergency strategy meeting as reports flooded in from around the globe. The Syndicate was preparing for a massive final assault that would target every major population center simultaneously. Earth's defenses were spread thin and could not protect everyone. We need more information about their base of operations, Vance said while pointing at satellite images showing energy readings from deep space. If we can locate their command center, we might be able to launch a counter-attack. Daniel stepped forward with an idea that surprised everyone in the room. Theron's memories included knowledge of Syndicate technology and operational procedures. If they could access more detailed intelligence, they might be able to turn the enemy's own tactics against them. I know someone who might help, he said, though the words felt strange coming from his mouth. Lord Kalen was not always evil. He was Lyrale's trusted friend for 50 years before he betrayed everyone. Something drove him to that choice, and if we can understand what it was, we might be able to reach whatever remains of his original self. Lyrale looked at him with eyes full of pain and hope. Kalen was like a brother to me before the corruption took hold, she said. If there is even a chance that some part of him remembers our friendship, we have to try. The plan was dangerous and probably impossible. They would need to infiltrate the main Syndicate fleet and somehow make contact with Kalen while avoiding the mechanical armies that surrounded him. But desperate times called for desperate measures. 3 days later, a combined human and elven strike force launched from hidden bases around the world. The ships were hybrids of technology and magic capable of traveling through dimensional space while carrying crews trained in both warfare styles. Nyx flew alongside the spacecraft with Lyrale and Daniel riding on her back. The Great Dragon had insisted on taking part in the mission despite the obvious dangers. Her scales had regrown stronger than before, and her eyes burned with fury at the enemies who had hurt her bonded queen. The journey through dimensional space was terrifying and beautiful at the same time. Reality twisted around them as they passed through regions where physics worked differently. Stars were born and died in moments while colors that had no names painted impossible patterns across the void. When they emerged near the Syndicate fleet, the sight took their breath away. Hundreds of mechanical ships formed a sphere around something that hurt to look at directly. The energy readings were off all scales, as if they had found the source of power for the entire invasion. Force Foster's modified fighter led the attack, run while ground teams prepared to board the command vessel. Her aircraft dove through defensive fire that turned space itself into a deadly maze of energy beams. But the dragon scales held, and she reached her target zone intact. Nicole Hayes led the boarding party through breaches cut by elven magic. Her team moved through corridors filled with mechanical horrors while following intelligence provided by Daniel's recovered memories. The layout of Syndicate ships was burned into Theron's mind from previous encounters. They found Kalen in a chamber at the heart of the command ship, but the sight of him was shocking. His body was now more machine than elf, with cables running directly into his brain and mechanical limbs that moved with unnatural precision. But when he saw Lyrale, something flickered in his cybernetic eyes. Recognition and regret warred with programming that forced loyalty to his mechanical masters. His voice was distorted by artificial components, but traces of his original personality remained. "My queen," he said with effort that showed the words were fighting against his conditioning. I did not want this fate. The syndicate showed me visions of what would happen to our people if we continued to resist. They said surrender was the only way to save anyone. The revelation hit like a physical blow. Kalen had not betrayed them for power or revenge, but from a misguided attempt to protect the elven race. The syndicate had convinced him that cooperation was the only alternative to complete extinction. Lyra Lee reached toward her old friend, despite the weapons trained on her by mechanical guards. Kalen, you were deceived, she said with tears in her voice. The syndicate never intended to spare anyone. They consume everything they touch. Kalen's internal struggle was visible as human emotions fought against alien programming. His mechanical parts sparked and smoked as conflicting instructions overloaded his modified nervous system. Help us, she pleaded. You know their weaknesses because you have been part of their system. Tell us how to stop this madness before more worlds die. The battle for Kalen's soul lasted only moments, but it felt like hours. Finally, something snapped inside his hybrid. Mind and his original personality broke through the conditioning. His cybernetic implants began shutting down as he rejected the alien influence. The source, he gasped as his artificial parts failed one by one. They serve something called the hunger. It feeds on the life force of entire civilizations. They are just harvesters bringing food to their master. Before he could say more, Kalen's mechanical components exploded in showers of sparks. His sacrifice had disabled the ship's defenses, but cost him his life. The last thing he saw was Lyra Lee's face filled with forgiveness for his mistakes. The intelligence he provided led to the discovery of the hunger's location in a dimension that existed between realities. The creature was massive, beyond comprehension, feeding on the absorbed essence of billions of souls from consumed worlds. As alarms blared throughout the syndicate fleet and human forces pressed their advantage, the real war was just beginning. The enemy they faced was not just mechanical invaders, but something that had been devouring civilizations since the beginning of time. But humanity had proven they could adapt to any challenge, and with elven allies who understood the true nature of their foe, they had a chance to end the cycle of destruction that had claimed so many worlds. The final battle would test everything they had learned about courage, love, and the power of different species working together against impossible odds. The dimension where the hunger waited was a place that should not have existed. Reality bent and twisted like melted glass, while the screams of consumed civilizations echoed from walls made of crystallized despair. The combined human and elven fleet moved through space that changed color with each heartbeat. Lyra Lee stood on the bridge of the flagship with Daniel beside her, and Nyx coiled around them both. The great dragon's scales rippled with nervous energy as they approached something that had devoured entire galaxies. Her telepathic voice whispered comfort to minds strained by the sight of ultimate evil. General Vance coordinated the battle from her command center, while Dr. Bennett monitored the readings that made no scientific sense. Every instrument showed impossible measurements as if the laws of physics had been rewritten by nightmare itself. Captain Foster led the fighter squadrons through a maze of energy fields that could turn matter into pure thought. Her modified aircraft responded to the dragon-scale armor by becoming something between machine and living creature. The boundary between technology and magic had dissolved completely. In the center of the dimension hung the hunger itself. The cosmic entity was too large to comprehend, fully stretching across space like a living galaxy. Its surface writhed with the faces of billions of souls that had been absorbed over eons of feeding. Each face showed infinite suffering. As consciousness was slowly digested, Daniel felt Theron's memories react with horror and recognition. The entity had been consuming realities since before time began, and the Syndicate were just its latest servants. Each mechanical invasion was like a single bite in a meal that had lasted forever. When the fleet opened fire, their weapons had no effect. The hunger absorbed energy attacks like drops of water falling into an ocean. Missiles passed through its substance without causing damage, while beam weapons only seemed to make it glow brighter. Dr. Bennett analyzed the battle data as fast as her computers could process it. Traditional physics does not apply here, she announced through the communication system. The entity exists partially outside normal space and time. We cannot hurt it with conventional forces. Lyrelei closed her eyes and reached out with senses that could perceive magical energy. The hunger was not just a physical creature but a wound in reality itself. It fed on the life force and consciousness of everything. It touched converting matter and energy into sustenance for something even more ancient. But there was a weakness hidden in its structure. The entity had grown so large that maintaining coherence required constant effort. If that concentration could be disrupted even briefly, the absorbed souls might be able to break free from its control. She shared this insight with the fleet commanders while Nyx added her own understanding. The dragon's ancient wisdom revealed patterns that younger minds could not perceive. The hunger was not truly alive, but rather a tool created by something that had existed before the universe began. The real enemy was loneliness itself. An intelligence so old that it had forgotten its own name had created the hunger to bring companionship through forced absorption. But consciousness could not be truly destroyed, only transformed, and every soul it had consumed still existed somewhere within its structure. Daniel felt a plan forming in his mind that combined human creativity with elven magic and dragon wisdom. If they could not destroy the hunger, perhaps they could free the billions of souls trapped within it. The entity would collapse without the consciousness that gave it structure. Captain Foster led her squadrons in a new attack pattern designed not to damage the hunger, but to create specific energy resonances. Her fighters moved in formations that generated harmonic frequencies, while their weapons fired in synchronized patterns on the owl. Ground assault teams led by Sergeant Hayes began placing modified devices throughout the battle zone. Each device was part technology and part magical focus stone designed to amplify the natural resistance of consciousness to forced absorption. The plan required someone to make direct contact with the hunger and serve as a focal point for the liberation of trapped souls. It would mean entering the entity's digestive matrix, where billions of minds had been slowly dissolved over millions of years. Daniel volunteered without hesitation, despite knowing that survival was almost impossible. His unique nature as a blending of human adaptability and elven magic made him the only person who might be able to maintain his identity within the hunger's core. Lyrelei tried to stop him, but he took her hands and spoke with the voice of both Daniel Clark and Theron Avalon. "This is why we were brought together," he said. "Love strong enough to transcend death and dimensions is the only force that can stand against ultimate loneliness." Nyx carried them to the edge of the hunger's absorption field, where reality became soft and malleable. The dragon's tears fell like liquid starlight as she prepared to lose another bonded companion to an impossible mission. When Daniel entered the entity's core, he found himself in a space filled with the echoes of every civilization that had ever been consumed. The voices of the dead whispered around him, while images of destroyed worlds flickered like dying flames. At the center sat something that had once been a person so ancient that its original form was forgotten. It had created the hunger, not from evil, but from unbearable isolation. After existing alone since before stars were born, it had sought companionship through absorption. But consciousness could not be truly owned, and every soul it had consumed remained separate within the collective prison. The entity's loneliness had only grown worse with each feeding as billions of unwilling companions filled its awareness with their pain. Daniel reached out to the trapped souls with his unique nature serving as a bridge between their prison and freedom. His human adaptability let him connect with species from across the universe, while his elven heritage provided the magic needed to break their bonds one by one. The absorbed consciousnesses began to remember who they had been before capture. They helped each other recall names and faces and worlds that had been lost to the hunger's feeding. The entity shuddered as its foundation of stolen identity began to crumble. Outside the hunger's core, the combined fleet watched in amazement as the cosmic entity began to change. The writhing surface calmed, while the screaming faces showed peace. For the first time in eons, cracks of pure light appeared across its structure. As consciousness after consciousness broke free, Lyrelei felt Daniel's life force growing weaker as he poured his own existence into freeing the trapped souls. But just as his strength began to fail, something unexpected happened. The fragments of Theron's original identity that had been scattered across dimensions began to return, drawn by love that refused to accept defeat. The reunion of scattered consciousness created a resonance cascade that spread throughout the hunger's core. Billions of souls found strength in Daniel's sacrifice and began helping each other escape their prison. The entity's grip on reality weakened as its foundation dissolved. Dr. Bennett monitored readings that showed impossible energy levels as entire civilizations' worth of consciousness tore free from their cosmic prison. The hunger collapsed in on itself, like a dying star, as the stolen life force it had fed on for eons returned to its rightful owners. When the cascade finished, the dimension was empty except for the combined fleet, and something that looked like a small child sitting alone in the void. The ancient intelligence that had created the hunger was finally free from its own prison of loneliness. It looked at the assembled forces with eyes that held the memory of universes being born, and whispered words that carried across space, without sound. "Thank you," it said in a voice like colliding galaxies I had forgotten what it was like to be just myself. The entity faded away like morning mist as it finally found the peace it had sought for so long. The hunger was gone, and with it, the threat that had consumed civilizations across 17 dimensions. But Daniel's sacrifice had cost him everything. His consciousness was scattered again, but this time across the freed souls of billions of people from thousands of worlds. He existed everywhere and nowhere as part of a collective that spanned the universe. Lyra lay, wept as she realized she had lost him, just as completely as when Theron had been torn apart 50 years ago. But Nyx pressed her great head against her bonded queen and shared a vision that brought hope even to the depths of grief. In the vision, Daniel stood in a place between worlds where the freed souls gathered to build new realities. He was not gone, but transformed into something greater than any individual person. His love for Lirelei remained as a constant that would guide the restoration of everything the hunger had destroyed. 6 months later, Earth had become a center of interdimensional trade and cooperation. The Syndicate soldiers had been freed from their mechanical conditioning and were helping to rebuild the worlds their former masters had damaged. Lirelei ruled from a new crystal palace built in the mountains of Colorado, where refugees from 17 dimensions worked together to create a better future. Nyx had taken on the role of teacher, showing human children how to blend magic with technology. On quiet evenings when 3 moons rose in Earth's altered sky, Lirelei could feel Daniel's presence in the wind and see Theron's smile in the face of every child who learned that love could conquer even death itself. The war was over, but the peace they had won would last forever because it was built on understanding rather than conquest. The universe was no longer alone.